Hi guys, my name is Joe and welcome to Fighting Words, the martial arts library. On this channel, I review martial arts books and talk about other martial arts related subjects. This is a segment I call Tangent Tuesday, so on the second Tuesday of every month, I pick a topic and just talk about it. Shoot from the hip. Last week I had an unexpected internet interaction. There was a question on a martial arts forum. The question was asked: how many of you guys actually could recognize authentic catch-as-catch-can wrestling? I might have had something to say about that, but the first thing I noticed was the use of the word actually, which to me seemed to express disbelief. You know, there's a difference between going, do you know Angelina Jolie, and do you actually know Angelina Jolie, right? You know, I addressed that point first, and he said, yeah, sometimes, people have shown me stuff that isn't the real catch wrestling. I'm like, okay, cool. How do you know what real or authentic catch wrestling looks like? Here's a tangent. I actually think that question is very difficult to answer. Just gonna try to make this as brief as possible. By the late 1800s, early 1900s, catch wrestling was a set of rules, and there were many wrestlers who competed under multiple sets of rules. Catch wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling, side hold wrestling, collar and elbow wrestling. They would compete in multiple events during their career, and catch wrestling was just a set of rules they competed under. My understanding is that authentic professional level catch wrestling, at least competitively, stopped being a thing roughly around the early 1920s. What I mean by that is that the people who were getting paid to wrestle, the professional wrestlers, turned it more into the show that we get today. There were occasionally double crosses and things like that, but by and large, the powers that be that controlled everything would set people up, and there was an agreed upon winner before they even walked out to the match, right? Anyway, the catch wrestling at the time, based on the manuals, really seemed to emphasize getting a fall, throwing someone down, turning them onto their shoulders. And there were even different variations of that. Like, do you need to pin just the shoulders? Do you need to pin the shoulders and the hips, 2, 3, or 4 points? Is there such a thing as a flying fall? In other words, would a throw where the guy hits on his shoulders or hips, does that count as a fall? And the submissions that were used at the time mostly seemed to be about forcing the guy to turn onto his shoulders. Frank Gotch, with his famous Gotch toe hold, it was an ankle crank. The guy would be turtled up in front of him, he'd grab their ankle and twist it, and they could roll with the force so they wouldn't get their ankle broken, and they'd wind up on their shoulders where he could pin them. So anyway, from basically the 1920s until very recently, there was not competitive catch wrestling. Now, there were professional wrestlers who sort of kept it alive, but we're still talking, I'm going to say, roughly 2 generations before that type of wrestling got more attention again. And by the late 80s, early 90s in Japan, for instance, you had things like Shuto and Pancrase, were guys who had been trained by some of these old school wrestlers, none of whom had competed during the heyday of professional catch-as-catch-can. They knew some holds, but like the catch wrestling world champion hadn't been a thing for like decades at that point. Anyway, so they teach these submission holds and some of these other things to some of their professional wrestling students in Japan because they want to use more realistic techniques. In Japan, we get a system of wrestling that has some roots in catch-as-catch-can, but it's also been blended with judo and sambo, and very often combined with striking styles like karate, Muay Thai, and kickboxing. And there were like submission-only events, grappling-only events. But do you consider that catch-as-catch-can because it was blended with other styles, but also you couldn't win by pinning someone, where you could historically? And something similar happened in Brazil. There's a style called luta livre, which, as I understand it, has its roots in catch as catch can. They spent a lot of time competing with the judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, the Gracie folks down there, which affected how they did their style. And again, as I understand it, you cannot win by pinfall. It's all submission oriented. Is that authentic catch as catch can? So, and on top of that, amateur wrestling, freestyle and American folk style or collegiate wrestling were basically amateur catch as catch can events. They were contested under a set of rules originally that were catch as catch can for amateurs, which had a lot of the more dangerous things taken out. You could have a collegiate wrestler claim to be doing catch as catch can, and it would sort of be weird, but I also don't think it would be historically inaccurate. So what is authentic catch as catch can? And of course, once the UFC happened and there was shoot fighting out of Japan, the MMA birth, people started looking for alternative submission grappling styles. So people would go to these old school guys like, Dick Cardinal and Carl Gotch and Billy Robinson and try to learn what they knew. But it still comes down to like, okay, so does that make it catch as catch can? And there's a difference between how those guys are doing their things in some cases. And there's been a rebirth in England, in Wigan, which was one of the birthplaces of catch as catch can. These are all different flavors and have different influences, and like, is only one of them authentic catch as catch? So that's why, like, the question initially, I was like, all right, that's just sort of weird. To borrow a phrase that I think came from JFK, trying to define authentic catch as catch can, to me, is sort of like trying to nail jelly to a wall. It's good luck. As I said, we got into like, okay, so how do you know what authentic catch as catch can is? And he seemed to get kind of defensive about that. And was sort of vague with his answers and wound up blocking me. I don't know, man. Like, if you're going to act as the gatekeeper, I kind of want to see your badge. And that was sort of another factor in this. I've been online, like many of you, since at least the early 2000s, and in the online catch as catch can community, there's a lot of infighting and trash talking, and has been, from what I've seen, pretty much since the beginning. Like, this guy doesn't have the real deal. I have the real deal. Look at how good my stuff is, and you shouldn't watch him. He's trash. And, to the point where these guys are clearly trying to affect the other person's business. I mean, this is ultimately about the product that they're trying to get out there. This is what they're selling. So when this fellow is asking, do you actually know what authentic, like, that's what I'm hearing in my head. And again, a lot of that might be on me and my interpretation. But I sort of had a feeling that this dude was sort of waiting for an opportunity to tell you that what you thought was real catch wrestling wasn't, because it wasn't the catch wrestling he was doing. I don't know how true that is, again, because I got blocked. And our conversation didn't get past like, okay, so how do you know? But, I'm using this to sort of illustrate a point. It's definitely not just the catch as catch can community. I've seen it in like Jeet Kune Do, in Wing Chun Kung Fu, a little bit in karate, not quite as much, but, in ninjutsu communities, there's a lot of martial artists out there who will tell you that you are doing the same martial art that they're doing wrong. Then we also, going back to Jeet Kune Do, there was a guy, the guy was a great source of historical information. Great source. He had a lot of access to like Bruce Lee's library and his personal notes and all that. But also, if you weren't doing Jeet Kune Do the way he was doing it, then you weren't really doing Jeet Kune Do. And some of the hills he decided to die on were weird. Like, if you're not leading with your right side, you're not doing Jeet Kune Do. All right, well, what if I have a sidearm, and I don't want my sidearm to be closer to, a potential attacker? Then is it okay if I lead with my left side? Well, it's not Jeet Kune Do. Okay, dude. If everything else about it totally is Jeet Kune Do, but I'm leading with my non-dominant hand, then it's not. All right. There are just people out there who decide that they want to be the arbiters of truth. That's a problem in martial arts. First of all, just by and large, let people do what they want to do. And let them have fun. Because like 90% of the time, we're just doing this for fun. Again, if someone is clearly doing something that is harmful, like you see those, striking coaches who will line people up against the wall and punch them in the face with gloves as hard as they can to like toughen them up. Okay, that's harmful. We can't do that. If someone claims to be teaching Shotokan and you look at what they're doing and compare it to Shotokan and you're like, okay, the belt system is different and you're not teaching the same kata and what's going on, that at least deserves further investigation. But by and large, especially for some of the things that may not necessarily have a distinctive lineage or curriculum, just let people do what they want to do, And following on, another factor is, again, how do you know what you're doing is the real deal? Please don't make it because Sensei said so. I have a bunch of insecurities, so I try to make sure that everything I'm doing is correct, so I'm always questioning myself all the time, right? I don't want to give out bad information, and when I do try to correct it. I am happy to be informed with authentic information when it can be verified and not just so-and-so said so. But I would encourage everyone out there to sort of be skeptical. And, again, how do you know what you're practicing is the real deal? This is no shade on the original guy. I don't know what his answer would have been. I'm sure I would have accepted it. Please do your own research into the people you're training with, the things you think you know, the resources you have. Because I got some stuff on here that's garbage. I'll tell you that right now. I got a lot of good ones, and some that I wish were better because they're sharing information but not citing sources. There are even some good instructors who are like, I don't think he's getting that thing right. So yeah, be skeptical, keep an open but questioning mind, and let people do what they want to do because they enjoy it. And I can't really figure out a way to end this video, but I think that's all I have. Anyway, those were some tangents. At least I didn't repeat the story about the guy who thought that palm strike was 7 times as powerful as a punch, because some dude in Korea said that once without backing it up. Yeah, question your instructors. Politely. Question the stuff you're learning. And question me, please. I try to cite my sources where I can. Feel free to look those things up, Please, that's why it's provided, keep me honest. Anyway, that's all I have. Thank you for following along, and I'll see you later.